who would have thought that a text message could cause so much trouble? Well, joining me to talk about all of this is the New York Times football correspondent Rory Smith. Rory, thanks for joining us. Now, Diego has been ordered back to London ASAP as Antonio Conte feels the heat. But who exactly has the upper hand here?
It's difficult to say, isn't it? Because Costa seems to have got himself in this situation where he'll only sign for Atletico Madrid, the one team in the world he kind of can't sign for immediately. They have a transfer embargo until January. You'd have thought that maybe Chelsea and Atletico could do a deal where Costa goes and trains in Madrid and then is registered in January. But at the same time, there seems to be such bad blood between him and Conte that isn't necessarily moving ahead as smoothly as it might do, I suppose. Not quite sure. I suppose Costa maybe has the upper hand because he can. If he doesn't get on a plane back to London, then he stays in Brazil and there's not a huge amount Chelsea can do about it. But at the same time, that costs him 6 months, potentially a year of his career, which isn't ideal. It's a really, really odd situation, and the sort that, to be honest, only occurs very, very rarely.
Well, Costa is certainly digging his heels in, indicating that he'll go to the club that he wants and not to the highest bidder. Now, are we potentially seeing another game changer here between player and club, especially 22 years after the Bosman ruling?
It's interesting because this summer, you mentioned the soaring fees earlier, Neymar for 200 million, potentially Mbappe for even more. But we've also seen a real kind of change in the way that transfers are done. We've seen Southampton basically tell Virgil van Dijk he's not being sold. RB Leipzig doing the same with Naby Keita. And now Costa's kind of saying, well, actually, I want to do the opposite. I want to decide where I'm going. I'm not being told by the club because I'm sure that Atletico Madrid are not the only team in Europe or in the world, given the interest in China, interested in a player of his quality. It could well be, if it does become legal, it could well be that it is a bit of a challenge to the kind of the nature of the transfer market. And I know there's plenty of people in Europe, most notably FIFPro, the players' union, who'd quite like to see the transfer market as we have it kind of disbanded and players not treated as the only employees in the world who can't decide where they work. So it'd be interesting to see how far it goes. I don't think it's really in anybody's interests for it to become a legal battle, either Chelsea's or Costa's. Legal battles tend to be very expensive, although obviously no one's got any shortage of money. I'd expect there to be some sort of resolution this month, but it may well be that one of the two of them is going to have to swallow their pride, and as it stands, it doesn't look like either of them are prepared to do that. Well,
if it had to come down to that, who do you think would, I don't know, put their ego aside?
Well, I suppose Costa has more to lose. So it may well be that if Costa, it's more in Costa's immediate interests to say, look, we need to find a solution to this. I don't want to sit in my house in Logato in Brazil for the next 6 months or a year until Atletico Madrid can get the money together and the allowance to sign me. So I guess it's maybe more likely to be him. That said, Chelsea could well think, well, look, we don't need this hanging over us. We could do with a bit of money. Let's find a solution. And whether that's that he goes on loan somewhere for 6 months and then joins Atletico in January, whether he goes and just trains at Atletico for 6 months and doesn't play, he might be prepared to do that. But at some point, someone's going to have to climb down because this, well, I'd be inclined to say this can't last forever, but then you look at Winston Bahada, who was at Chelsea in the late 90s and early 2000s and basically spent 4 years not doing anything like playing football, but picking up his wages because he refused to move and Chelsea wouldn't cancel his contract. So you could get that sort of situation, but I think that's still a long way off. And hopefully everybody involved sees a bit of common sense at some point.
OK, Rory, thank you very much for joining us on Beyond the Game.